Yes, it is Palm Sunday. I'm so excited. Listen, I believe God has a great word for you today. And if we just open our hearts and just hear what God has to say to us, then He's going to transform our lives. He's going to change us, shape us, and mold us to become more like Him so that we walk out of these doors not the same person that we were when we came in, but completely and totally changed by Jesus Christ. And so today, if you have your Bibles, open up to Matthew chapter 21. We're going to start right there in Matthew chapter 21. Here's what's taking place. Jesus is moving towards the cross, and He is a week away from His death. And so as He's moving towards the cross, He's coming through town. As He comes through town, He stops before He gets there at Bethpage. And as He stops, He tells His disciples, hey, I want you to go into town, and I want you to get this donkey for me. If you go down to town, you're going to find this colt. It's going to be tied up right there. I want you to untie it, and I want you to bring it to me. I need it. Well, Jesus, it's not ours. Like, we can't just go get it. And He says, well, if somebody asks you what you're doing, just tell them that the Lord needs it, and they'll be okay with it. So His disciples go into town, and they find the colt tied up right where Jesus said it was going to be tied up. And they grab the colt, and you can imagine the owner comes out, and he's like, hey, guys, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, that's mine. And he's like, hey, Jesus needs it. He's like, oh, okay, go ahead. They take it back to Jesus. Jesus gets it. He sits on a colt, and he starts heading towards town. And as he's heading towards town, you can see this scene because it's Passover week. And so it's estimated that 1 million people had gathered together around there. And so you've got all these people, and as Jesus is coming through town, all of a sudden people begin to worship Jesus. They begin to recognize Him for the first time as who He is, the Messiah, the Savior, the one that they had been looking to and looking for all of their life. And so as He's coming, they begin to take off their jackets and throw them down, because this is what you see as a scene sometimes as a king comes by. And so to honor the king, what they would do is they would cover the road. And so they began taking off their jackets and throwing them down in front of Jesus. They began getting palm branches and waving those palm branches and throwing them down at the feet of Jesus. And they began shouting, Hosanna! Blessed is He who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna! And they began shouting as Jesus makes His way through town in crowds and street. You can just imagine as He's going through and making His way, and everybody's just, Jesus! Jesus! As He's making His way through the town. But here's the problem with this scene. And we're going to talk about this scene today, and we're going to talk about the donkey. But here's the problem with this scene. The same people that worshiped Him today are the same people that cry, crucify Him next week. The same people that recognized Him as Messiah, as Savior, as King. Because here's the thing, their expectation was not met. And so their expectation turned into frustration. And their frustration turned into anger. And their anger turned against Jesus. Because their expectation was He was coming through town and He was going to overthrow and overtake the government and take His place, because they had been downcast. They had been the outcast. They had been the ones that were pushed aside. They had been the ones that were ignored and neglected. But now Jesus, their Savior, their Messiah, He's come. And we're going to overthrow and take over this place. And it didn't end up happening. And so all of a sudden that frustration begins to turn into anger, and that anger turns against Jesus here in just a week. But what I want to do today, before we begin to talk about that, what I want to do today is I want us to look at 4 things today from this passage found in Matthew 21, verses 1 through 9. If you want to read it there, I'm not going to read it. The first thing is this. What we have to understand is what we have, it's not ours, it's His. It's not ours. Can you imagine being the owner of that donkey? And it's tied up right next to your house. And all of a sudden these 2 guys come walking down and they see it and they're like, that's where Jesus said it would be. And they start untying it. And you begin running out. Hey. What are you doing? Don't you ever touch my King James Version again. You'll get that if you've read the King James before. Don't you ever touch my donkey. And so now he's standing, and they're like, whoa, Jesus needs it. And what does he do? Okay, go ahead. You can take it. Why? Because what we see in this story and what Jesus is trying to teach us through this story is that what we have is not ours. It's just on loan to us, waiting to be used by God. See, God has that donkey at the place and the time in order to be used by Him. Here's what I know. When I turned 16, oh man, I was so excited. I don't know kids these days and understand kids these days who do not have their driver's license the day they turn 16. It was 7 a.m. I was dragging my mom and dad out the door, and I was like, we're going right now. I'm getting my drive. I've got to start driving. And now kids, like my nephews, they were like 18. And I was like, hey, can you run to the store and get... He's like, I don't have my license. I'm like, am I confused? How old are you? He's like, 18. I'm like, what is wrong with you? I don't want to drive. I'm like, well, you're not as smart as I thought you were. But here's it. When I was turning 16, I could not wait. And before we had phones, what we had was called magazines, okay? And those magazines, one of them was called an Auto Trader. And instead of being able to open an app on your phone, you actually had to go to the store and buy a magazine. Crazy how life has changed. And so I would go to the store and I would buy all these Auto Trader magazines. And I would go through all of them. And I would circle cars. My problem in circling cars, though, is my desire and my expectation and my taste is a little more extravagant than the actual price tag that I was able to carry at the time. And so I would be going through Auto Trader and I would just be dreaming and I would be like, oh my gosh, that's what I want, a Porsche 911. Yes, that's what I'm getting. What 16-year-old, like that's their, I was like, yes, or a Corvette. Oh my goodness, like a 70s Corvette. Oh, just beautiful Stingray. I mean, that's what I wanted, T-tops. I mean, just gorgeous. And I was like, that's what I'm getting. And I had my heart set on that. Well, one day my grandpa calls. And if you know my grandpa, he's in the oil business. And he always has a new Cadillac. And he picks up the phone and he calls me one day and he's like, Johnny, you're never going to believe this. I found you a car when I was out today. I was like, are you kidding me? And in my mind, I can see it. Porsche, Corvette. I'd even take a Cadillac if that's what he got. Like and I just saw, I grew up in a private school. My dad was the coach and the athletic director. My mom was a coach or sponsor. She's cheerleading. I mean, is it a sport? Come on. It's a debate in our house all the time. And so, my mom was a coach and my dad was a coach. And so I went to this school. And all my friends, like they were pulling up in brand new BMWs, in a Saab convertible, in Porsches, in Hummers, in Tahoes. And so I'm like, I can't believe it. Thanks, Grandpa. I'm like, what kind is it? He's like, it's a Ford Tempo. It's a light blue Ford Tempo. And I'm like, I don't know what it is. Never heard of it, but I love it. Sounds really, really classy. And I was just like, this is amazing. And so I was super excited to get this car. My grandpa lives in Beaver. And so my mom's like, I'll go get it for you. And I'll drive it back. And so I was like, yes. And so I'm walking around school all day long, telling my friends, my car's coming. It's coming. It's going to be here. I can't wait after school. It's going to be here. I walk out after school, kick the doors open like I own the place. I'm like, boom, the car's going to be sitting right there. The cars are there. There's a car with a bow on it. And I walk out and I look at it and I'm like, somebody else got a car too. And then I realize light blue means baby blue. And a Tempo does not look like a Porsche, okay? If you've ever seen, like they do not match up. And so I walk out and I'm like, what? And all my friends are like, where is it? They're like, is that it? Yes, it's amazing. Listen, this thing was a 4-cylinder, and so it went really fast, and it had incredible features. And so when it had features that some cars don't have. When you drive 70, it's got this vibration system in the seats, and so it just kind of massages you as you're driving. And so you're just driving, and it just feels really, really good as you're driving. But here's what I learned really quickly. Even though it was my car, even though I had the keys, even though I put gas in the car, my mom and dad did not like that I would go out and get tickets in my car. My mom and dad did not like when I would show up late when they had given me a curfew and told me that I needed to be home at a certain time. And so we had a road and it was 50 miles an hour in order to get home, but I would be pushing it trying to get home. So I would lay down and I would put the massagers on and I would be driving down the road, just trying to get home. And inevitably, there's a cop sitting there and he pulls me over. And I'm just like, sir, but you don't understand. Like, my parents are going to take this from, like, it's mine, but it's not mine. And so then I would get home and I'd just walk in and throw my keys to my parents and be like, I'm not driving, I got a ticket. And that road in front of our house, like, I'm really proud of, I helped pay for most of that road. And so I did most of that on my own. I worked, and instead of putting money back and saving, I was just like, let's give it all back to them. Like, I love what you're doing here, and I want to help lay this blacktop. And so I did that just growing up, and it looks beautiful. But here's the thing. Here's what I learned. Even though it was mine, it wasn't mine. Even though it was mine, there was an authority that was greater than me who was lending what I thought was mine. And because I lived under their house and under their authority, they had final say. See, what you have to understand about what you have is God is lending it to you for the proper time to be used. And so your gifts, your talents, your ability, God is giving to you in order to be used at the proper time and at the proper place. Where God steps in and he looks down and he says, hey, there is a guy that is going to be standing by a gate. I want you to go meet him. Because when you meet him, he's going to be able to tell you about me. See, you have a gift, you have a talent, you have an ability. There's somebody who loves kids so much that they hang out in Way Cool Preschool, and so that you can sit in this service and you can hear what Jesus wants to do in your life and how he wants to change you and shape you and mold you into who he's created you to be. And there's people using that talent. There's people in the parking lot waving at you, loving on you, encouraging you as you come in because they have a gift and a talent that God is using at this time in order to bring change into your life. And see, even your finances. See, because a lot of us, we read this story and we think, oh my goodness, I serve a God that's a thief. I can't believe he stole a donkey. See, and so there's some cars out in the parking lot right now that I just feel in my spirit, God saying, hey, you need to give those keys to Johnny for the Lord. Okay? This is for the Lord. But this is how we look and we think, man, oh my goodness. Like, what is Jesus doing? And what he's trying to do is he's trying to teach us that what we have, it's not really ours. What we have is a gift from God that is to be used in order to transform and change this city. But if we hold on to what we have and we start taking the mindset of this hoarder's mindset, like, I don't have enough, I need more. My office backs up right over here to the event center, and every single week we have a preschool that meets from about 8:30 to 11:30 every single day. And my door is literally right there. And they will come in and they're, ah! And then for some reason, like, they love coming over to the door and I'm trying to sit there, like, pray, study, and everything, and they're beating on the door. And then there's little fingers under the door. Hello! Just yelling at me. And I'm like, what in the world? And then I hear them. That's mine! Give it to me. That's mine. That's mine. He stole that from me. He took that from me. It's mine. See, here's what you have. Nobody teaches those kids to be selfish. See, there is a sin nature inside of us that we fight against every single day that makes us selfish. It makes us think that what we have, we've got to hoard. That what we have, we can't share. That if we give it away, we'll never get it back. That if I let them use it, then something could happen and it could tear up. That if I open my hands and I say, I want to have a heart that is generous and giving. And so one day I just had heard it, and so I went over there and I kicked the door open, boom. The kid was standing behind, I hit him in the nose, blood everywhere, like, oh gosh. No, I'm joking. But the thing is, right there, you have to understand this. What you have, God's just waiting to use. See, God has given it to you in order to make his name famous, in order to bring salvation to people in a way that they have never seen before. But when we hoard and when we hold and when we go, I've got to have more and you can't have mine. It's mine. Can you imagine the way that God looks? It's funny listening to those kids on the other side of the door, but how many times do we act like that as adults? Mine. And so what Jesus is trying to teach the disciples in this moment is that whatever you come across, whatever you have, just understand, listen, I've put it in your hands, not to hoard, but to have open hands that say, listen, what can I do to make Jesus famous? What can I do to get the name and the fame of Jesus out to as many people as I possibly can? See, that's how this story has changed. That's how this goes from an incredible story to a story of, is Jesus a thief? To, I understand. Like Jesus is the one who created it all. Jesus is the one who holds it all in his hands. Jesus is the one who has entrusted us with what we have. And so the next thing that we see in this story is number 2, be where you're supposed to be. You have to be where you're supposed to be. Jesus looked at his disciples and says, as you go into town, they had not entered town yet, but he says, as you are going into town, I want you to go down, take a right at the first street that you see. Then when you come to the next street, take a left, go 3 blocks down, you're going to see the donkey on the left. He's going to be tied up right there. Why? Because he knew the donkey was going to be where he was supposed to be. Some of you are frustrated because of where you are. Can you imagine that donkey? It's a colt. It's young. Every single day, the owner brings it out, and he takes him and he ties him up to the post, and he just stands there. I do voice impressions on the side, if you didn't know that. I'm really good. And so he's tied up right here. And as he's tied up right here, he's watching as these other donkeys are all around him, and they're walking by, and he's like, man, I wish someday I could pull a cart like that. Man, I wish someday I could be used like that. He sees the donkeys as they're carrying people. He sees the donkey as they're carrying kids. And he's just tied up, and he's just looking. And he's just hoping that someday he's going to be able to be used. Here's the thing. If you get ahead of God, then you are going to be in the wrong spot when God comes looking in order to use you where he's supposed to use you at the time he's supposed to use you. Some of you are stuck and you feel like I'm tied up. Listen, maybe you are right now. But just know that maybe Jesus is coming and he's looking for a donkey to get on so that he can ride it into town. See, maybe some of you, there's just a moment that God is waiting for in order to open it up and to say, hey, I want to use you. Hey, this is the time, this is the place. I know you've been frustrated, but this is the moment, this is the time, this is the place. I want you to carry Jesus. And if you weren't tied up in that moment, then you would have missed it. See, when I was in college, I was a counselor, and I worked at a church, and we were fixing to go to youth camp. And I was just starting to work there, and they were leaving the next day, and I wasn't sure if I was going to go. I was like, no, I don't think I'm going to go. I'm just going to stay home. I was starting work after the camp got back, but they were like, man, we really need you. Can you just come and go to camp? And I was like, okay. And so I show up that morning, that day we're leaving. The buses are lined up. Everything's ready. Everybody's walking up in order to drop their bags off. All these high schoolers and everything. Well, then all of a sudden, this hot blonde steps out of a car. And I'm like, good grief. It's weird. I'm in college. She's in high school, but she's good looking. And I step off the curb in order to go help her with her bag. And I did kind of the dead leg thing. And so I was trying to look cool as a college student, walking up. And I, and stepped off and kind of came towards her. Like, well, I killed it. She laughed at me. I took her bag and loaded it in, and then spent the rest of the week just trying to get her to pay attention to me. And so here's what I promise. I promise you that we will not let college students do that to your high school girls. But here's the thing. I got a wife out of it, and she has followed me around everywhere I've gone since. And but if I wasn't there and obedient at the right time, at the right place, I would have missed it. When would I have seen her again? When would I have been able to spend that time with her again? How would we have fallen in love? But I knew the Spirit of God was speaking to me that I needed to go, not knowing. I thought I was investing in kids, not knowing that I was going to actually meet my wife on that trip. And here's the thing, a lot of us, we get frustrated with where we're at. And so we try to get ahead of God. And we try to move, and we try to untie ourselves, and we try to, yank ourselves away from that post and get away from what God's going to do and just say, I would be used so much better if I was pulling a cart over there. Like, I would be used so much better if somebody would just get on top of me and I could just carry them. Like, that's what I was made. I wasn't made to just hold up a post right here. And you're getting frustrated because you don't feel like all your gifts, all your talents, all your abilities are being used. But let me promise you, because here's the next thing you have to think about. God knows right where you are and exactly where you're supposed to be. God knows right where you are and has you exactly where you're supposed to be. Don't get ahead of what God is trying to do in your life, because this is a teaching moment. This is a moment to learn. This is a moment to watch, and that's the next thing right here I want us to look at is this. People are watching you. People are watching you. See, you have to understand that you have influence over people's lives. And as that donkey is right here tied up, he's watching everything that everybody else is doing. He's seeing how everybody else is working. He's seeing how everybody else is pulling those carts, how they have people on their back. But he's watching, most importantly, his mom. Can you imagine that colt coming out every single day with his mom? And his mom is showing them what needs to happen, what needs to take place, how he needs to live. See, your kids are watching you. And who they become is determined by the example that you set for them. Some of you are frustrated because your kids aren't who you thought they would be. But then you step back and you take a broader look at life and you realize, but I'm not who I need to be. And so my kids aren't who they need to be because I'm not who I need to be. See, your kids are watching everything you do. Heather and I, we sit and we talk about people a lot. And so just know we'll talk about you later on. No, we sit and we talk, and when we talk, it's just a private conversation between us two. And there was something that happened in the family one time that we didn't necessarily agree with. And so we were just having a discussion as a couple, just talking about, I wouldn't have done it that way. It just happened to be, grandparents, and so I wouldn't have done it that way. It shouldn't have happened like that. And our kids were playing, and then the next day they were actually going to their grandparents and they were spending the night. Well, next thing we know, the next day, ring, hello, hey, so you don't like what we did here? First of all, I'm freaked out. How did you get into our mind and know what's going on and what we had said? Then they were like, your kids told us. And I'm like, oh my goodness. They were listening, and I didn't know they were listening. What they heard, I didn't realize that they had heard. See, what you do is what they will do. What you say is what they will say. How you act is how they'll act. How you treat each other as a husband and wife is how they are going to treat their spouse when they get older. See, what you find acceptable is what they're going to do in excess when they get older. And so if you find it okay in order to yell and you fight and you get mad at each other and you just, you get super, what you have to understand is when they get older, what they've seen is what they're going to expect. See, when you look at the TV and you watch things on the TV, then maybe you shouldn't be all of a sudden what they see, they're going to say, that's fine because my dad and my mom watched it. When you hear and say something that you shouldn't say, when the words come out of your mouth, all of a sudden you're going to hear them say what you never wanted them to say in public because you said it at home, and I would never say those words at church, but now all of a sudden they're coming through the doors of the church and they're like, bleep, 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 bleep. Like, I don't know where they got that. I don't know where that came from. And they're like, yeah, Mom, you say it all the time. And so here's what you do, they're watching. They're watching. And they're becoming who they're going to become through the example that you set for them. But the last thing is this. You have to carry Jesus. Can you imagine that donkey being tied up? And the disciples come down and all of a sudden they start untying him and he's like, this is it. Who bought me? I can't wait. What am I going to do? What is my purpose? Well, what's going to take place in life? And as they grab the halter and they begin to pull that donkey, and he just starts walking with them, and they walk out of town, and they find a man standing right there with just a few disciples. And he looks and he's wondering what's going to happen, what's going to take place. And the next thing he knows, Jesus is sitting on his back. As he begins to walk through town, See, he always desired purpose. He always wanting something greater for his life. And now when he begins to walk through town, all of a sudden people are gathered around him. And people are shouting for the man that's on his back. People are throwing their coats down in front of him so his hooves don't get dirty. And all of a sudden he is being treated like royalty as he's coming through town. He never thought that a little colt who was tied up to a post moments later would be carrying Jesus through town. See, what you have to understand is the way that people see Jesus is they see Jesus through you. What you do, they think Jesus would do. What you say, they think Jesus would say. Where you go, they think Jesus would go. How you respond, they think that's how Jesus would respond, because that's what we do. Listen, I'm a Christian. I love Jesus. He's made a difference in my life. And then we get out in the world. And the Thunder are fixing to play today. Jesus, help them win. Come on, somebody. Beat Portland. Come on. Damian Lillard, miss every shot. Come on. And so, but we get out in the world and all of a sudden we start to get fixated. And we forget that who's on our back and whose name and fame we're trying to actually proclaim. All of a sudden we forget that he's on our back and we forget that we're walking through the doors that we're walking through with him. And then when people start hanging out, instead of speaking the way that we should speak, all of a sudden we're speaking in ways that we're like, I forgot he was with us. When I played football, I made it a point when I played arena football. I wanted to do something different. And I just didn't want to play football. I wanted to make an impact on those guys' lives. And so we played, and then the coach ended up leaving, and my dad ended up taking over as the coach. And every single player on the team he shared the gospel with. Every single one of them. One of them gave their heart and their life to Jesus Christ. But here's the thing. I didn't want my life to affect what my dad was trying to preach to them. Because they knew the message that my dad was giving to them is what I had already picked up and I was carrying. And so where they would go, what they would do, what they would talk about, what they would say, I knew, man, I can't participate in that. Because if I'm telling them Jesus will make a difference in your life, Jesus will change you from the inside out. Jesus is what you need. But yet they look at my life and there's no difference, there's no change. Nothing is any different from their life and my life. Why do they need a Jesus that hasn't made a difference? So they're saying, you say he makes a difference, but we're doing the same thing. We're laughing at the same thing. We're going to the same places. Why do you need Jesus? And so I didn't want my life to look like that to them. And so here's what ended up happening by the end of the year. Instead of swearing and cussing and saying things, what they would do is if a new player came on the team, because people were getting cut all the time, and so we would get new players. When a new player would come on the team, they'd be like, hey, don't say those words in front of Johnny. Don't act like that. He loves Jesus. You don't do that. That's not how you act in front of Johnny. He's different. He's not like us. See, and it wasn't this arrogance that I was trying to show them. It wasn't this, I'm better than you. It was this, no, Jesus will make the difference in your life. Jesus will change you from the inside out. You are no longer, this is our memory verse for this week, 1 Corinthians 5:17. I'm a new creation. The old things have passed away, and behold, all things have become brand new. And so in Jesus Christ, I'm no longer the same person that I was. I'm no longer the same person that I used to be, but Jesus has made me new in him. And so here's what you and I get to do. This week, as we begin to look forward to Easter, as we begin to move towards the death, the burial, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, as we move towards this week, here's what we get to do. There are people in your life who need Jesus. There are people in your life who need to hear the message of Jesus. And some of us are making excuses. And when Jesus is climbing on, we're trying to buck him off and we're trying to knock him off and we're just like, I don't want to go there, Jesus. I can't say that. Here's what you have to understand about this colt. It was an unbroken colt. He shouldn't have been carrying anybody. He definitely shouldn't have been carrying Jesus. He wasn't ready for that. Some of you, you don't feel like you're ready. You don't feel like you can share the gospel with it. I can't tell anybody about Jesus. I'm not ready. I can't make a difference in my family. I can't make a difference at work yet. I'm not ready. And Jesus is saying, that's exactly where I want you.